Okay, it is time for us to take on something a little more challenging for us to wrap our heads around. This is more conceptual than anything, but it does play a pretty big part in how HTML pages are structured. And in this video, we are going to be talking about block elements versus inline elements and how they're different and how they sort of work together and sometimes, or most of the time, actually don't work together. So a block element is an element that will take up as much width as possible. So we've seen it with a lot of paragraphs, but if you've noticed, when we create a link, a hyperlink with the A tag or the A element, we can put multiple links side by side, but paragraphs we can't put side by side. It always breaks it down to a new section just under it. But a link can always be like one link here, one link here, one link here, and so on. So in this video, you and I are going to look at the differences between block elements and inline elements and how they work, and then you'll have a task on sort of just experimenting with it a little bit. So behind me here is empty VS Code, and I'm going to hit Command N. If you're on Windows, hit Control N to create a new file. And I'm going to save this as block versus inline elements.html. And that's it. And I just pasted a simple body in here, and not a body, but a bunch of HTML template. And let's call this block versus inline elements. And these are drastically different things. So a block element is like a P element, block. And so if I try to put text beside it, that's not how we spell beside it, or if I put text beside it over here, doesn't matter what I do, this is always going to break down onto its own separate line. So I open up Firefox, and let's open up this particular file. Let's close these. And we can see here when I zoom in, text is beside it. Over here, well, that's supposed to be left text, and this is supposed to be right text, but really it's just on top of each other. So you've got top text, middle text, and bottom text. This is what a block element does. A block element will take up the entire width of your page, as much as it possibly can. Now I'm going to show you how this works by writing a little bit of CSS. And at this point, you don't need to know what I'm writing here. It's okay if you don't understand this. You can simply ignore this part. I just want to do this for a visual effect. So I save that and refresh my page, and you can see that there is a red border all the way around this. And it's taking up all this extra space all over here, even though it's not using it. That is a block element. So let's take a look at this. And let's call this a block element. Now this has nothing to do with the spacing in here, by the way. As you saw earlier, this text up here and this text, they were all on the same line, and it didn't really matter because the paragraph was always on its own line. So we have a block element now. Let's just preview this so you can see my work. We have a block element. The opposite of that is an inline element, and we have a few of these. One that I've referenced earlier was a span element. And a span element is just an element that sort of wraps around some text. But we've also looked at anchor tags, and in the block elements, we've also looked at H1 all the way through H6, something like that. And so when we start actually looking at this code, this is going to look pretty ugly, I bet. Yeah. So we have let's do this. Block elements, let's make a list here. Block elements, and in this corner we have H1 all the way through H6. We have paragraphs, which is something that we've dealt with quite a bit. And over here we have inline, let's do H1s. Ironically, inline elements. We have span, which is a new one we're going to learn about, and we also have A, which are links, A links. Now again, that block element is going to take up as much width as it possibly can. Think of it as being very selfish. It takes up all the space. It's that person that sits down in a booth beside you, spreads his arms, and says, all this space is mine, even though you could fit like 4 other people beside him. That's basically what a block element is. An inline element is someone who's more conscious of how much space they're using and really just says, oh, I only need a little bit, so I'm only going to use a little bit. And if someone wants to sit beside me, that's okay too. They can come sit beside me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to comment some of this out. We learned about HTML comments, and they can be multi-line like this. So let's go ahead, comment that out. Let's create another comment here. And okay, so we have some comments in there and our page is going to look somewhat back to normal. Block element, let's call this paragraph, and let's call this one H3, or let's just call it headers rather, because it's all of them. So those are block elements. And in the inline elements, we have span. So let's look at span number 1, and let's also look at span number 2. And let's put these on the same lines. And span number 3. And just for posterity, let's add a horizontal rule so that we have something to split these up in our page. So at the top we have block elements, and you can see that these do not work side by side. They do not like sitting beside each other. Whereas a span element, it has no problem sitting beside other span elements. And it's not just other span elements, it's okay sitting beside other links. So let's go ahead and get rid of the spans in here. And let's add just a regular link. So let's go to links.html and links.html. That's all we're going to put in here. And you can see that these work side by side. So that's pretty cool. Now what happens when you mix and match these? When you start mixing and matching block elements and inline elements, they typically, actually they don't work. Just by their very nature, they will not work. So if we put an H1 here, header tag, this is a large one, and right beside it we put a span, smaller text. Well, we see our header tag and our smaller text is below it. And even if we view our source code, we have a header tag here and smaller text right beside it. It doesn't really matter because the browser is saying, okay, well, this is supposed to be a block element. So this gets its own line. Everything else can go above or below it, but not beside it. Where this comes together is when they all start to work together. So let's say we have a paragraph in here. Now we know that this is a block element, and block element number 1 in here. And this is a link to relative links.html. Relative link 1.html is the file. And let's put a link in here. ahref is equal to relative link 1.html. Let's put this on a new line. Again, it doesn't matter that it's on a new line because HTML doesn't care. And clean up that white space. And here we go. Block element number 1, and this is a link to relative link 1.html. So you can see that they're working side by side now, but they're technically not. The reason I say that is because you have a block element here, your top level element is a paragraph, or in this case, it's called a parent tag. So let's make a comment here. Parent tag, or parent element. And here we have a child tag, or a child element. And so these aren't actually working side by side. If we wanted to make these side by side, we would have to put another element here. So this is a sibling. And this is getting into familial hierarchy, more of the document object model stuff, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit later down the road when we're a little more familiar with this stuff. So this one is a sibling tag / element. Now I'm going to show you a cool little trick here. So let's right click, go to inspect element. And if we stay in our inspector, we can actually see all of the code in our browser. This is exactly what the browser is seeing right now. So in our body, we have a child element of a paragraph, which is technically the parent element of the link. This is the child of the parent. Now, a way to think about this is we have these two p tags side by side, the same sort of indenting or outdenting, if you will. And that means that they are brother and sister. Whereas in here, this is sort of like your older brother, older sister, has already had a child and is starting a family of their own and has had their first child. And that first child is a link, and they named it relative link 1.html, which is a terrible name for a child, but that's what they named it. And this could be you. This could be you as a sibling to that brother or sister. Now that's just a quick little way of seeing exactly how your browser interprets things, and a very, very rough crash course on HTML element hierarchy and how it relates to family terminology, I guess, familial terminology. Now let's go ahead and let's start adding some styles in here. So it's style border 1 pixel solid red. We did this earlier. And this just shows us a border. Okay, so we have a block element here. We know for a fact that we have a block element here. And when we put a border around our link, we're going to see that it does not take up the entire width. Actually, all it does is take up the little space around it. And we can do the same thing with a span as well. So let's do a span and let's give it a style of a border of 1 pixel. It's going to be solid and it's going to be red. Span number 1, span number 2, and span number 3. And when we refresh our page, we can see that they are all side by side. So this is a block element, and this is a block element, and this is a child element, but it is technically considered an inline element. And then we have 3 inline elements side by side. So the thing to take away from this is inline elements can sit beside each other, and block elements require their own lines. That is a simple way of thinking about this. So your task for this video is going to be, I want you to, 1, create a new .html file. I want you to create it from scratch. So as we see here, make sure you have your doc type, make sure you have your HTML tag, your head, add a title, make sure you have your body. So add all of that good stuff. 2, create 2 block elements. And these can simply just be p tags or maybe I don't know, maybe like an h3 tag. We know that all headers are block elements now. And number 3, create 2 inline elements. So they can either be links or they can be spans. And lastly, put text in all of these and see how they fit side by side. So basically you should have 1 paragraph, another paragraph, and then maybe a link and a span, something like that. Put them side by side, fill them with text, open that up in your favorite browser, and see how they act. Now, if you don't understand everything that's going on in this video, that's actually okay. Don't worry about knowing all of it. Don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel like you're stupid because you don't understand it. That's not the case at all. It's just, this is more of a conceptual thing, and it's a little bit of a mind hurdle to jump over. But once you understand it, it makes a lot of sense. So just bear with me, and as we practice these, it will start to make more sense as we move throughout this course.